Welcome, I'm Rogers Anderson. As we travel around Williamson County today, I thought it would be a good show for us to talk about some of the disasters that have occurred in other parts of our country away from Williamson County in Tennessee, and specifically down in Houston, Texas, and the entire state of Florida. And we have with us today Bill Jorgensen, my media right, and Mac Purdy. Both of these gentlemen have been engaged, involved, and actually Bill has just returned from the Houston area. And so, first of all, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for
And second of all, thanks for what you do for our community every single day to make it a safer place for all of us as residents here in Williamson County to live and work and go to and from work. But more specifically, how you both have pitched in and done your job, and you're recognized across the state of Tennessee, our county, our office, our men and women. They're called upon quite frequently and quite regularly for the training that has been provided. And although you both look a lot younger than me, you've got a lot of good experience built up in your portfolio, and so that experience, there's nothing like having experience in a traumatic situation we've seen in Houston, Texas, and certainly in Florida. So thank you for your service. Thanks for what you do to make Williamson County a better place to live and to work in. Before I kind of talk to you a little bit about where you've been, and then we'll get with Mac, kind of coordinating a lot of the things that are going on in Florida. Share with you some things that happened. Both of you probably know this, but about 2 weeks ago, here we are in the middle of the month, and so shortly after, actually the flooding was still occurring down in the Houston area, there was a call put out by the sheriff and Dr. Mike Looney and myself and the other mayors to try to do something that would help children. And specifically, what could we do? And so we had a press conference, and several people were there, and we put the call out for school books, backpacks, notebook paper, number 2 pencils, glue, scissor, and it seems like there was something else. And we had a tractor trailer rig. The sheriff was going to be responsible for that. And our goal was to staff it every day at the Ag Park. We started 2 days before Labor Day. Now, Labor Day is not the best time to start anything because people are traveling. But the first 3 or 4 days, that was staffed and manned from 8 to 4 by Barry's Chapel Church of Christ. Then the day after Labor Day was staffed and supported by Grace Chapel Church out at the Leapers Fork area. And so those congregations had people anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 that were taking in those supplies that were brought over by individuals. Some groups decided to raise all of those supplies within their church or their organization. Others were just people like you and me, drove out in their vehicles, and we were out there taking in those supplies, and they drop off 1s or 2s. And my sources tell me in Williamson County, backpacks were getting in short supply because everybody was turning them in. We not only filled up a tractor trailer load, the sheriff and I were just talking today that it looks like we're going to need another tractor trailer in which to haul these supplies down. It was interesting. There were many people. We had specifically said stay with these items because we knew we could package them. Lasco here in town had given us the pallets, had given us the boxes to put the materials in. And of course, we were out at the Ag Park. There wasn't any rent. And the guys worked out there. They have a dolly. They could pick these things up and put them in the trailer when we got ready to do that. But on top of the supplies we asked for, we got teachers teaching things. And they were coming in, and we were trying to say, well, maybe we won't get too many of those. Well, the teacher supplies were just quite frankly just about as overwhelming as anything we did. We've had other counties outside of Williamson County bring in a load of supplies. Trenton County, Robertson County, many churches have been involved just bringing them out. So I want to say thank you to all of those people in our county that heard the message, answered the call, and we will be delivering those down to those children. The schools are already calling for it because there many of these folks, I'm sure you're going to share with us, their homes were devastated, everything's gone, the stores are gone, but life has to get back to normal. And we wanted to do our little part in doing that. And there are other organizations doing that, but this was specifically coming from Dr. Mike Looney and the sheriff, the other mayors, and so many volunteers to see that this was done. So I wanted to say thank you. Tell us what you've been doing over the last couple of weeks down in Houston.
Well, I will say I spent about 7 days in the back of my Suburban sleeping, which was, or the county's Suburban, which was very nice to have compared to where the other folks were sleeping. But we got a call to support Swiftwater and search and rescue in the Houston area. And out of the state of Tennessee, I think around 91 people went and around 60 vehicles. And we left, I don't even remember which day now, but we left at 4 p.m. in the afternoon or so and arrived in College Station, Texas. The next day, drove straight through, but we had to stop about every 150 miles or so to get gas. So whoever sucked the gas the fastest through their vehicle, they were the first ones, and then the whole convoy stopped. So our mission, my specific mission was communication as a communications leader, and then also had a communications technician and then an IT specialist. So Butch Coulter and Sean Cothran went also, and their help was invaluable. So we went to quite a few different places, finally settled down in Houston in an area called Briar Forest, which also it's kind of like Cool Springs. It's got commercial and it's got residential, and there was a bayou that runs through there that flooded. It's about 6 miles long from Briar Forest all the way into downtown Houston towards the 610 loop around Houston. So 6 mile long flooded area, probably about half mile wide was flooded. And we set up communications, met with the incident commanders there, and provided communications for those all those folks from Tennessee so they could operate safely in those flooded areas, going house to house and pulling people out and checking on them. And then we were integrated with the Houston Fire Department. They were very gracious. They allowed us to shower in their stations. They wanted to feed us. There was all the folks in Houston were very generous, and they were glad to see Tennessee there helping them.
One of you, Mac, maybe you'd be the one, because even though Bill would know the answer and I know the answer, but for the people that are watching this, when you have a natural disaster such as occurred in Houston, who makes the call down there to request help? Now, that's not to say that all of us here would just jump in our cars and go down and do it, but we have jobs, and taxpayer base pays for you and Bill and myself. And so there has to be not only coordination. You don't want everybody just running down there with a bunch of boats and vehicles, even though I'm sure there were plenty of the guys that the good old boys, we call them, that just wanted to help out. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this coordinated effort, this communication and training and bringing the right vehicles for Swiftwater, there's got to be a procedure. Kind of talk us through how that works.
Absolutely. So the simple version without a flow chart is at the local level. That's where we talk about disasters happening first, and that's who's going to deal with them at the end. And they make that first request, that initial request that if it was us, if it was our disaster, we would say we have a need for, and one of our jobs is day to day to look at what are those gaps going to be. If we have a large scale disaster here, we have many great resources, but our responders will be impacted, their families will be impacted. We will not have enough resources for a catastrophic or major disaster like our neighbors in Houston and Texas and Florida faced. And so we would send that request, or they send that request up to their state emergency operations center. So each county or local government coordinates that and says this is what our need is, and they send that to the state. The 50 states and the territories have a compact, a mutual aid agreement that solves all of those problems like insurance and pay and overtime and those things that you were referencing, and makes all of that legal, and makes sure that the right resource gets in the right place and that it's done in a coordinated effort. And so there are people sitting in the State Emergency Operations Center in Texas and in the State Emergency Operations Center in Florida that are working those requests. And when they send it out, similar to the shopping things people do on the internet, it's almost in reverse. They put out and say, we need this. And in this case, it was a swiftwater rescue team, or it was a communications team, or it was an incident management team, or 50 nurses, or emergency ambulances, an ambulance strike team. And so those things all mean something and have numbers and things attached to them. And then the different states, typically the ones closer to the affected area, will look at that and say, yes, we can do that, and this is what it would cost us to send that to you. And then the receiving state says, okay, Tennessee, I want 2 of your swiftwater teams, and North Carolina, I want 1 of yours, and they kind of go shopping for it. A lot of that's based on the logistics, who's the closest and who can get it to us the fastest and the best resource. And so that is the process that we work with Tennessee on. And again, 91 Tennesseans went in that group to Texas. We sent another team of about a dozen from Williamson County to Florida about 10 days later, a little bit after the Texas group got home. Tennessee sent, I think, 5 ambulance strike teams, which would be 25 ambulances, went down from across the state. There are 50 nurses from our public health across the state that went. Over 500 National Guardsmen from Tennessee. So I'm sure some of our neighbors in Williamson County, though that's obviously not a Williamson County resource that went on the nurses or the National Guard, are going to support our neighbors in Florida. And so those are all coordinated through that state emergency management.
Mac, just how important is it for the President of the United States to declare an area a disaster area?
Well, when you look at the impact to a community's infrastructure, and you teach me and the rest of us quite often about our growing community and the tax base and how all of that matters to supporting education and roads and those things. And if you can imagine stopping your tax revenues during a disaster because you don't have any sales tax, and you're really impacting property taxes depending on how catastrophic the disaster is, and then you're really devastating your infrastructure, your roads, your utilities, and so for that presidential disaster declaration really helps that community rebuild those infrastructure costs, the roads, the utilities, the cost of the response, so that burden isn't brought onto the taxpayers, so that they can do that recovery. In any disaster that's declared at that level, 75% of the cost goes to the federal government once they declare that disaster for public assistance. So impact to that public infrastructure. There's also individual assistance and small business assistance, which is vital to our individuals and our small businesses, but it is just part of a safety net that's layered with the Red Cross and Salvation Army and the other nonprofits and church groups and local charities to really create layers for the public. It doesn't make you and I whole again if we were to lose our home or our business, but it's there to keep you from totally falling through the cracks and being out on the street. So it's vitally important.
Bill, you've been here working for the county and the 911 center, emergency manager. Now you're our public safety director. And we're very blessed that in our county, and I'm going to use cities involved with us, that we're very blessed in that we do have good equipment and enough equipment to handle our needs here. But it's not always been that way. And in so many of our other counties, even though they want to help, they don't have the equipment to help. And so it does my heart good, and I think taxpayers that watch this should feel good too, that indirectly, here you went down, you left your family, your wife, and children, and spent 7 days living in the back of a vehicle, and all the discomforts that goes with, the mosquitoes. I'm sure you lost a little weight, eating irregular, but eating. But without the equipment that we have and the training that we provide, it's just almost impossible to help somebody if you don't have the equipment and the training to help them with that. And all across our county, we have good men and women in these different areas, but they may not have 2 of something. Now, somebody else may say, well, do you need 2 of this and 2 of that? If you ever have a disaster, you never have enough. And without this mutual aid agreement of all of us trying to work together, that we are our neighbor's keeper. I know that's paramount in your mind. Both of you do an outstanding job in the areas of responsibility you have. You're like 2 peas in a pod, I call it. You see one of you, you're going to see the other. But at the end of the day, we're able to help because of what you gentlemen have pushed through, and the manpower and the women too, to help these other communities.
I think the priority is take care of Williamson County. So when we take care of Williamson County well, then we have the ability to help our neighbors. So the equipment, I mean, we're constantly planning and looking at gaps, and we saw a lot of gaps in Houston when we were down there. So not only are we responding to other areas when needed and when called, when we can, but it actually gives us great experience in dealing with these disasters. So when we come back home, we're looking at what we're doing here so that we can even do it better here when a disaster strikes here in Williamson County.
And over the last several years, we've made a real strong effort to push that training out to other departments within Williamson County government. Now, we have a wonderful relationship. I'm sorry Todd Horton couldn't be with us today, and Glenn Johnson, and a lot of these Franklin and Brentwood folks that you just never see, but I don't see them as often as I would see you, but you know who they are. And Brentwood and Franklin really step up to the plate along with the county every single time. It's not to say the other cities don't try to help, and they do where they can, but they don't have the volume of needs that you might have out of Brentwood and Franklin. But Fairview does what they can, Spring Hill, they all do what they can do based on the limited sources. I think it's interesting to note that while you guys are away and some of that equipment is gone, things still happen in our county, and we have to keep workers here. And over the last several years, we've put in, you guys have put in, I certainly haven't done it, but I endorse it, putting training, getting like Laura Cheveria, which is our animal control center. How do we handle those animals in disasters too? Because believe me, they're just as important as to those people that are being affected in that area, that dog or that cat, or heaven forbid they got some more exotic animals, we don't know how to handle them. But I mean, Laura's been away for the last 3 or 4 days in Florida, or 5 days, I think, and I was talking to her day before yesterday. I mean, she's worn out now. She's learning, she's gaining a lot of experience, and she'll do a better job when she gets called to the next. But here's a young lady that's got 2 small children and was called to go down there, and Dad has to stay at home and help. So I mean, it's that sacrifice. But let's talk about, without all I'm saying is it's wonderful to live in a county. It's great to be the mayor of a county, and I'm sure the other mayors feel the same way, that when we can reach out and help our neighbors, but at the same time still hold the line here, because we do have to take care of ourselves in case something happened here. Tornadoes and hurricanes come through this area.
You can look at the partnerships that made going to Texas possible. For example, in sending, we sent 20 swiftwater rescue technicians and I think four to six boats, right? But obviously that rain ended up here. We had significant amount of rain after that hurricane, and have to maintain a capability, and the state looks at that too. And so you look at Brentwood and Franklin still had some capability. Fairview had capability. Spring Hill had capability. Our volunteers, our volunteer fire and rescue had that capability to backfill, and so the volunteers may not be able to get off work to go for a 14-day deployment to Texas, but they absolutely can stand up here and provide that backing. And so whether it's to surge for a local disaster here or to step into that gap so that we can go help our neighbors and get better and get smarter and see where our gaps are, it's the way the system is designed, and we can't always do it. There are requests that come and we say, no, we can't support that one, but we can support this next one. And so whether that's our volunteer fire, our smaller departments in some of our neighboring cities, our neighbors even in our neighboring counties, to look at even Hickman and Murray are people that we talk to as we deploy people out and say, okay, we've got to stand together, because if any of us have something, we know the whole region is short on resources right now. And so it gives us a great opportunity to work those relationships and partnerships and make sure that we're doing the mission for the people of Williamson County first.
Bill, you were in the Houston area, like you said, for about 7 days. I can't imagine, and I know you've got lots of photos and things like that, but I just can't imagine how long it's going to take them to get back on their feet. I don't know how you build roads and infrastructure, and of course I know, the utility companies are all involved in this, the gas companies are all. There's just almost no level of government that's not touched, and even outside of government that's not involved in something as massive as what we've seen in Houston, and we're seeing it again in the Florida area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the flooding there, at least, and all we saw was the west side. Now on the way back, we drove through Louisiana and New Orleans to come back home, and Louisiana was touched just as hard as Texas. All through there, we saw gasoline tankers flipped over on their sides, just floating in the water, and everything going on. It's going to take a long time to recover from that flooding. I think they had close to 50 inches or somewhere around there of rain. That's a lot of rain. And the water goes up at night as the Corps let the water out of the reservoirs, and then goes down during the day as they stop that. So people would come in to their houses, do what they can, and then they had to leave again to get back out before the water rose back up.
Mike, I would, and Bill, but kind of alternating the conversation here, in view of everything that's occurred and that we're all aware of, there's a huge need in our county for more volunteers. The picture you just painted, that when the paid people have to go off, the volunteers can still, by the very nature of them staying on, because they have their regular jobs, and the volunteers could, in the event we have a disaster here or a need here. My point is, if you're watching this show and you want to be involved, there's a place we can plug in.
Definitely. From the American Red Cross, our amateur radio volunteers, to the Sheriff's Department Reserve, to our volunteer fire, to emergency management, and lots of places probably in between. If someone is interested in engaging with their neighbors in this community in this way, there is definitely a skill set they have or that they can be learned, because in many cases it's how I got started in this career field, is as a volunteer. And learned part of that craft that then I get to do every day. And so whether it is something you do on the side or it's a skill set you have from something you've already done in your life, we absolutely always have a need and a place to plug people in.
Just got a couple of minutes left, and I'm sure I've overlooked something that you all would like to share with the public. And Bill, I'll start with you first. If there's something that we need to touch on here in the last couple of minutes, feel free to bring it out.
Yeah, I think Mac brings up a great point about volunteering. In the fire service alone, we have about 230 maybe now volunteers in the fire service, and over the next 5 years, we'd like to get to 5 years or so. We'd like to get to 1,000 volunteer firefighters in Williamson County.
I don't remember if it was you or someone else, or I read it someplace, that when you look across the continental United States, most of the firemen and firewomen are volunteers.
That's correct, the majority. Don't know the percentage right
I
off the top of my
either.
head. It may be like 70 to 75% are volunteer. The firefighters in the United States are volunteers.
And so many of our men and women that work in our cities that are paid, whether they're in Nashville or Brentwood, Franklin, and Spring Hill and Fairview, they're also volunteers at nights on the weekend.
Yes, they
for
are.
their community.
They are.
And so the plea I make to folks watching this, and if you know someone, and you can be as old as I am or as young as 10 or 12. I remember when I believe it was one of your children was involved in what we used to call the old ham operator,
Yeah.
but I believe he was a young man
Yeah,
when he kind of
Casey
got
was involved in amateur radio. Yes.
So, and we've got 100 and plus of those
Yes.
men and women to do that. Just it's all about communication. So I just make a plea out there that if there's something you can bring, something you can do, we provide the training, and oftentimes, more cases than not, we've got the equipment for you to learn how to do that too. Well, our time's about up. We've got 30 seconds. Again, I want to say thank you to both of you for what you do in our county, but even more so how you always step up, you and you get the teams together to get them out to the affected area. And I'm sure as time goes on, we will see more and more need for our surrounding neighbors, and we're glad to help. And I know you're glad to help, but it takes money, and oftentimes we have to kind of go both hands out to the county commission saying, hey, we need money too, because these are the things we need, and we understand that. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Rogers Anderson. As we sign off, we encourage you to participate, get involved, call one of these gentlemen, call my office, and be a volunteer for the things that you can do. Have a good day.
In All by Vera Jar. A cardinal red and cawing blue jay, golden finch to green parrot, brush strokes of joy from Almighty's palette, or fluttering butterflies, spotted and striped, flowing designs from God's kaleidoscope.